clearly look to be 15 or so inches long. I can see the toes clearly. I can see the heel clearly. I think they're beautiful evidence that what he experienced that day was real.
On April 27, 2007, after half a year of searching, a discovery was finally made deep inside Beltrami Forest. A search and rescue team stumbled across the remains of a man named Kory Kelly. The finding was not only sad, but also extremely disturbing. His body was not whole. It looked as though he had been cut in half. The upper part of his torso was gone entirely, while his legs and lower body were found in a swampy area, already badly decomposed. Some of his bones were lying scattered around, bleached white after months of exposure to the sun and weather. At first glance, investigators believed he had been violently dismembered before death. However, the mystery soon grew even stranger, because along with his remains, they would later find his camera, and the photographs inside it made the case even more chilling. The last day. To understand what happened, we need to go back to October 16, 2006, the last day Kory was ever seen alive. Kory was 38 years old, a family man, and an outdoors enthusiast. On that day, he set out with his friend, Jim Naprude, for what was supposed to be a simple hunting trip. Their destination was Minnesota's Beltrami Forest, a vast wilderness area full of rivers, lakes, and boggy swamps. If you traveled 16 miles further north, you'd reach Lake of the Woods, one of America's largest freshwater lakes, sitting right at the Canadian border. The region was beautiful, but also unforgiving.
Well, as millions head to U.S. national parks this summer, we are shedding light on a little-known list called the List of the Missing. The National Park Service has faithfully kept records of visitors who are gone, often without a trace.
The maze-like terrain of lakes, bogs, and thick woods could confuse even the most experienced hunter. But Kory and Jim thought they were prepared. They packed everything they needed for the trip, including Jim's loyal dog. Beltrami was known for its white-tailed deer and moose, but hunters often came here specifically for grouse. The forest itself was the second largest in Minnesota, and because of its dangerous terrain, the Park Service had warning signs posted everywhere, reminding hunters not to venture out after dark. That afternoon, at around 4 o'clock, Kory and Jim set up camp. Wanting to cover more ground, they agreed to split up and meet back at the campsite 2.5 hours later. At 6:30 p.m., Jim returned right on time, but Kory didn't. When he finally did make it back, almost an hour later, something was clearly wrong. He was sweating, visibly shaken, and seemed rattled by something he couldn't explain. He told Jim that he had gotten lost. Then he asked if Jim had noticed a strange, awful smell in the woods. Jim brushed it off, telling him it was probably just a dead animal, maybe a grouse or even a moose carcass. Neither of them had been successful in hunting that day. To make matters worse, Jim suddenly realized that his car was running low on gas. He told Kory to stay put at the campsite while he drove into town to refuel. Before leaving, Jim gave a warning: don't wander off. But just as Jim was driving away, he spotted a grouse only a short distance away from camp. To his surprise, Kory was already running after it, chasing it deeper into the woods.
Fred, as officials continue to search wooded areas much like this one here, I spoke to that sister. It was very emotional. She's out of state, but she says she wants her brother back home in North Carolina.
When Jim returned to the campsite around 9 that night, he found it completely empty. Darkness had settled over the forest, and Kory was nowhere to be seen. Jim called out into the trees, shouting for his friend, but no one answered. Hours passed. By 11 o'clock, with still no sign of Kory, Jim began searching along the same paths they had walked earlier. But no matter how far he searched, he couldn't find any trace of his friend. While moving through the woods, Jim came across something deeply unsettling. In the dim light, he encountered two strangers standing silently in the darkness. Because of how shadowy it was beneath the trees, he couldn't make out their faces clearly, but something about them felt wrong. There was a terrible odor hanging in the air around them, a smell so sharp and foul it immediately set Jim on edge. Even stranger, the two men weren't carrying firearms. In a hunting area like Beltrami, that was unusual. Almost every outdoorsman carried a rifle or shotgun, but these men were empty-handed. Their presence didn't fit the place or the time. They told Jim firmly that he needed to contact law enforcement as soon as possible. Not long after that encounter, Jim sat down with the Beltrami County Sheriff's Department for an official interview. He explained everything he could, starting with the fact that neither he nor Kory used drugs. The only medication he was aware of was the painkillers Kory had been prescribed after a serious spine injury from a past hunting trip. Jim also opened up about his friendship with Kory. Though they hadn't known each other for many years, they had quickly built a strong bond through fishing trips, long talks, and outdoor adventures. Jim described Kory as cheerful, responsible, and a solid companion to have in the wilderness. He repeated carefully that the last time he saw his friend, Kory had been chasing a grouse into the trees. After that moment, every phone call Jim made to Kory went unanswered, as each one was directed straight to voicemail. The search. Days passed in silence. On October 25th, Kory's family arrived, refusing to give up hope. They were determined to search, and they weren't alone. Hundreds of volunteers came forward to help, and multiple agencies joined in. A large staging area was quickly set up. Soon, helicopters were circling above, scanning the dense canopy, while ground teams pushed through the rough terrain, combing every corner of the massive forest. 2 miles north of Moose River, searchers finally found a sign of something familiar. It was Jim's dog, Sammy, who had gone missing the same night Kory disappeared. From the looks of it, Kory must have taken the dog with him when he walked away from camp. But Sammy was in terrible shape. He was weak, malnourished, and severely dehydrated. Investigators were concerned enough to send samples of the dog's stomach contents to a lab. They wanted to know if Sammy had eaten human remains, but the results came back negative. The only things inside him were grass and dirt. The search pressed on, and soon, more of Kory's belongings began turning up, scattered through the woods like breadcrumbs. His hat, a pack of cigarettes, a lighter, some bullets, a single glove, and then, the strangest clue of all, footprints. Some of them showed that Kory had been walking barefoot. There were also signs of a campfire nearby, though no one could say with certainty whether Kory had been the one to build it. Step by step, the trail painted a haunting picture. It seemed Kory had been heading southeast, following a flooded drainage ditch deeper into the swampy part of the forest. His possessions, left behind one by one, marked his path as if he were being pulled further and further away. Despite the massive effort that went into the search, the crews were left frustrated and empty-handed. Day after day, volunteers and officers pushed through the thick trees, swampy terrain, and biting cold. But no sign of Kory turned up. Helicopters scanned from above, K9 units combed the trails, and people on foot spread out in every direction, yet nothing surfaced. By November, the weather turned worse, and snow began to blanket the forest. Conditions grew too dangerous, and with no leads, the operation was reluctantly called off. Families and volunteers returned home with heavy hearts, not knowing if Kory was alive somewhere or already gone. The remains. Months slowly passed. Then came April of 2007. With the snow melted and the forest thawing, Beltrami County decided to restart the search. This time, they added more resources. 5 K9 units were brought in to increase the chances of finding something. For a while, the results were the same. No clear trail, no obvious sign. Then, during an aerial sweep, a helicopter spotted something unusual in a marshy patch of land. When the ground crew reached the location, they were met with a grim discovery. Lying in the swampy water were the remains of Kory Kelly, but the condition of the body shocked everyone. Kory's body had been severed in two. His entire upper half was gone, while his lower half had already decayed, stripped down to bare bone. Some bones were even scattered around the area, carried off by animals or water. Rescuers were baffled. This was not some overlooked corner of the forest. This area had already been searched during the initial operation months earlier. The only explanation they could give was that the tall grass, mud, and thick terrain had hidden his body the first time. Still, that didn't answer the haunting question. What had actually happened to him? The mystery deepened further. Kory's camera, his shoes, and his shotgun were nowhere to be found. These were key pieces of his gear, yet no trace of them turned up. The autopsy revealed another troubling detail. Kory's bones showed clear signs of gnawing, evidence that animals had fed on his remains. But that only explained what happened after his death, not how he ended up in such a horrific state. The biggest, most disturbing question remained. What kind of force, animal or otherwise, could rip his body completely in half? Beltrami Forest was home to black bears and wolves, predators that could certainly be dangerous. However, experts noted that neither of these species possessed the strength or ability to cause such extreme damage. And Kory wasn't defenseless. He had been carrying his shotgun with plenty of ammunition. As an experienced hunter, he was familiar with the land and knew how to protect himself in the event of a threat. Investigators noted one final detail that puzzled them. Kory's shoes were missing, and some evidence suggested he might have removed them himself. If so, this may have been one of his very last actions. But why? His friend Jim had always told him, if you ever get lost, head west. Kory even had a compass with him, yet for reasons unknown, he had gone the opposite direction. At first, when he began dropping smaller belongings, it seemed like he was leaving a trail, almost as though he wanted someone to follow his path. That suggested he had still been thinking clearly at the beginning. Police agreed with that interpretation. The search for his body officially continued throughout the rest of 2007. Even though they had already found part of him, the mystery still lingered, and his family wanted closure. Then, in 2009, 3 years after Kory's first disappearance, another shocking discovery was made. A hunter stumbled across items nearly 40 miles away from where Kory's remains had been found. In a patch of water, searchers pulled out a shoe. Next to it lay a blue jacket, and with them, a camera. Testing confirmed that all these items belonged to Kory Kelly, the man who had disappeared during the 2006 hunting trip. And that is where the mystery deepened even further. If Kory had truly walked all the way to the location where his belongings were discovered, it would have meant something almost impossible. Investigators calculated the distance and concluded that he would have needed to walk non-stop for 14 hours without eating, resting, or stopping to reach it. And yet, there was a huge problem. His body was found in a swamp in the heart of Beltrami forest, while his shoe and jacket were discovered far south in the Heron Lake wildlife area. The two places were miles apart, separated by rugged terrain. The question immediately arose, how could his belongings end up there if his body never left the swamp? For many, the only possible answer seemed to lie in the camera. When the missing camera was finally recovered, investigators opened it, hoping it would solve the mystery once and for all. Instead, what they found made the case even stranger. Inside were photographs taken by Kory himself. Some of the images were dated October 16, 2006, the very day he went missing, but others were from October 17th. That single detail revealed something shocking. Kory had survived at least 2 nights alone in Beltrami forest after he vanished from camp. He hadn't died right away. He had wandered, taken photos, and kept moving through the woods. But it was the photos themselves that unsettled investigators the most. Some were ordinary, shots of scenery, trees, streams, and stretches of the forest. They looked like the kind of images anyone would take while walking outdoors. Nothing unusual at first glance. But then came the stranger ones. They showed what looked like layers of thick woods, tangled branches pressed together, and formations that resembled nests built out of forest debris. It wasn't clear if these were natural structures or something else entirely, but they stood out sharply compared to the more ordinary photos. One image in particular captured everyone's attention. A set of giant, human-like footprints stamped into the forest floor. The size alone was far larger than any standard shoe print and looked unnatural against the damp ground. Another photo shows the entrance to a massive underground cave. The shot was poorly lit, but investigators could make out what appeared to be a hollow opening at the base of a slope. They debated whether it was simply a natural feature of the terrain or whether Kory had encountered something that gave him pause enough to photograph it. The rest of the photos were more complex to interpret. Many were dark, blurry, and confusing, almost abstract in appearance. Nothing in the camera's memory gave investigators a clear explanation of what had happened to Kory Kelly. If anything, the images only deepened the mystery, leaving far more questions than answers. Theories and the curse. Faced with the bizarre evidence, authorities decided to put forward a more straightforward explanation. They suggested that Kory had likely died of hypothermia after becoming lost. In their view, his remains had then been scattered and scavenged by animals. This official ruling classified his case as an accidental death caused by natural events. But not everyone accepted that answer. One of the most vocal critics was investigator David Pauladez, who worked with the Missing 411 Project. His group collected and documented cases of unexplained disappearances across parks and wilderness areas. He believed Kory's case was not just another hunting accident, but a prime example of something more disturbing: hunters vanishing under strange, unexplained circumstances. Pauladez argued that some of these individuals might have been observed and even targeted by something unknown. In Kory's case, inside the swamps of Beltrami, he suggested the culprit could have been what locals called a swamp ape, sometimes known as the skunk ape. This creature, according to believers, was similar to Bigfoot but smaller, living in lowland swamps and recognizable by its pungent, unbearable odor. Descriptions of the swamp ape often mentioned reddish-brown fur, though some claimed sightings of black-haired versions. It was said to stand about 7 feet tall, smaller than the northern Bigfoot, but still towering over any person. Some researchers speculated that if the swamp ape existed, it might live underground in caverns or even in waterlogged caves, making it almost impossible to find. The one thing nearly everyone agreed on was the smell. Witnesses described a suffocating, rotten stench, a foul odor so pungent it was thought to emanate from a scent gland, announcing the creature's presence before it could even be seen. And in Kory's case, that awful smell was something his friend Jim remembered clearly. He never forgot how strong it was, almost enough to make him gag, and how unnatural it felt in the middle of the forest. The memory of it stuck with him, leaving him unsettled every time he returned to the woods. Even years later, the mystery only grew. Kory's shotgun was never recovered. Without it, no one could say why he hadn't defended himself, or why it vanished without a trace. To honor his memory, a trail was named after him. The 39-mile route stretching from central Beltrami Forest to Heron Lake was officially called the Kory Kelly Trail. As for Jim, Kory's hunting partner that day, he carried a heavy burden. After his friend's disappearance and death, Jim gave up hunting altogether. The guilt consumed him. He would later say, "Sometimes I think life has this strange way of flipping the script. Hunters go out there thinking they're in control, that they're the ones with the power, but in an instant, the hunter can become the hunted." The scale of the search for Kory had been enormous. In total, 62 organizations across 2 countries were involved. More than 6,500 hours were spent combing the woods, with hundreds of volunteers giving their time. Yet, after all of that, Kory's case remained unsolved. His half-missing body, the eerie photos on his camera, the shotgun that vanished, and those 2 tall figures that Jim encountered, reeking of that nauseating smell. None of it fit neatly into the official story. Who or what had they really been? After the camera and its disturbing photographs were found, the case became widely talked about, not only because of Kory's tragic end, but because of the strange images left behind. And soon, even stranger events began to unfold in Beltrami. A couple of years later, 2 teenagers, curious and reckless, decided to retrace Kory's path for the thrill of it. They wanted to follow his route and post everything online. They set off into the forest, promising their friends they would return by evening. But they never came back. The next day, police discovered their car parked at the entrance to Beltrami Forest. The vehicle was there, but the teenagers were gone. On the muddy trail leading deeper into the woods, investigators spotted prints, huge footprints pressed into the soil. They resembled human feet, but they were far too wide, far too deep, as if left by something weighing several hundred kilograms. The teenagers themselves were never found. Even before that incident, local hunters had reported strange things in the area. Many claimed that at night, unusual noises came from the swamps. Heavy breathing, harsh guttural screams. The sounds didn't resemble any animal they knew. Some described it as a mix between the roar of a deer and a distorted human voice. Those who stayed in the forest past sunset often reported the same thing, a suffocating smell, like rotting meat or decomposed carcasses that appeared suddenly and vanished just as quickly, as though the source of the stench was moving through the darkness nearby. The county sheriff tried to calm fears. He told residents that the noises and smells could be explained by bears migrating through the forest. But locals weren't convinced. They noticed something else. The forest itself seemed to be undergoing a change. Wildlife was disappearing. Beltrami had always been known for its deer, its smaller mammals, and its predators. But in recent years, sightings have grown fewer. Deer numbers shrank. Small animals vanished. Even predators began to avoid the swamp areas. It was as though the natural world itself sensed something unnatural had taken hold of the forest. Then, in 2011, another event added to the fear. 30 miles to the south, a fisherman went out on the river early one morning before sunrise. The day was quiet and foggy as he prepared to check his nets. That was when he noticed movement across the water. Between the trees on the opposite shore stood a figure which was huge, broad-shouldered, and taller than any man he had ever seen. At first, he thought it might just be another hunter, but then the smell hit him. It was sharp, overpowering, and disgusting like decomposing flesh. The figure stepped closer to the river, and in that moment, the fisherman realized this was no man. The creature moved heavily, breaking branches with its weight, its breathing harsh and loud. Panic seized him. He dropped his fishing gear and ran mindlessly, not even caring about the direction. He swore that heavy footsteps followed him for several meters until he burst out into a clearing. There, the sound stopped. The fisherman returned home shaken. He never reported the sighting to the police, afraid people would laugh at him, but he told his neighbors. The story spread quickly, and in the community, it was taken seriously. To them, it was yet more proof that something strange lived in Beltrami Forest, something that not only frightened people, but also drove away the animals themselves. From then on, the forest gained a reputation. Tourists avoided it. Locals warned outsiders, if you smell rot, turn back. For many, Kory Kelly's tragic death had only been the beginning. Beltrami, they whispered, no longer belonged to humans. Something else had claimed it, something that ruled the swamps and the shadows.